can only imagine what firefighters see on a daily basis. Sometimes it feels like the job may be mundane, but you get reminded of how crazy and nerve-wracking the job must be when you see them speeding down the road to save someone's life. These stories are pretty creepy, and I think they'll freak you out. If you have one that you would like to share, whether it's a firefighter story or something entirely different, be sure to send in your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that keep this channel going. Now, without further ado, let's get into these creepy firefighter stories. I've been a firefighter here in New York for a good decade. I've seen everything from the smallest of fires to the biggest infernos that would make you swear hell itself had opened up. Being a firefighter is an amazing thing. You get to help people, and the people you work with are your family. It can be a bit rough if you are raising a family of your own, but I've never really had that problem being the lone wolf I am relationship-wise. It isn't that I don't like the idea of having my own family, it's just that I'm pretty much married to my job, and I've never really had the time to meet anyone. At any rate, it is a boon in my life because of the dangerous nature of my work. Enough about all that though. I'm going to share with you a story about some strange fires I dealt with a few years back. The first in the series of strange calls we got came in on Friday at 11 p.m. We got up and headed to the docks to check out a warehouse fire that had broken out. So far, so good. As things seemed relatively normal, we put the blaze out quickly upon arrival. While going over to the scene, it appeared as it was an electrical fire of some sort. Later confirmation would indeed reveal as such as well. Alright, I thought, these things happen, and now it is resolved. We get back to the station and fight several other fires over the next 24 hours. These are all fairly normal occurrences as well, or so it seemed anyway. It is Saturday at 11 p.m. when we get a call about a second warehouse fire near the docks. So, I'm someone who notices odd things. For example, 2 nights in a row with an 11 p.m. call. Odd, but probably nothing to worry about. Still, I note this in the back of my mind. The fire is quickly contained. It is once again an electrical related issue. That was also a bit off to me. Still, I went on about my shift. 3 nights later, at exactly 11 p.m., we are called out to another fire, once again, a warehouse in the docks. At this point, I'm weirded out a little bit. We fought this fire for a good hour. We were able to subdue it, but, strangely, as we were about to pull away, the area erupted in flames again. This was strange, but we were able to subdue the fire once more, and thankfully, no harm was done. Later, the investigation revealed another electrical fire. Okay, I think to myself, 3 electrical fires, all at 11 p.m., all at warehouses in the docks. If I didn't know any better, I would swear there was something going on there. A couple of days later, my buddy stops me as I come in from work, and he is leaving. He shows me something weird from some photos from the scene of the fires. There's a pattern that has emblazoned itself upon the walls of each place that was burned. It looks like a tree. It is distinct enough that you can see the design, and next to the tree there appears to be a hooded figure. I remember saying, that's strange, but then I thought, an odd series of coincidences, maybe. My buddy seemed to agree, but he wanted to show me patterns anyway, as he knew I'm intrigued by odd things like that. I go about my shift that night and everything is fairly normal. There aren't any huge fires, and any first respond calls we got due to medical emergencies or other happenings were all resolved without any incident. The next week is the same, just your standard fires and nothing too crazy. A month later we got a call at 11 p.m. to respond to a medical emergency. We arrive at the scene to find an older woman who's struggling to breathe. We try to calm her down and we check her out. She's just screaming, "Fire! Fire!" Eventually, after much struggle, we were able to calm her down. The woman looks at my buddy and says, I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry for your loss. Please forgive me." We look at each other for a moment and reassure the lady everything is going to be just fine. We are all a little spooked at this point, but everything seems fine. And it is fine, until 3 nights later. 11 p.m., we get a call to respond to a house fire. The address we arrive at is all too familiar. It's my buddy's house, and as we make our way through the fire, we find him, and we are able to pull his half-burned body from the fire. It is shortly after that his place erupts into even bigger flames. We fought the fire, giving it our best, and every time we were close, an explosion of some sort would happen, and we would have to fight the fire back once more. When we finally got the flames completely subdued, it was 4 in the morning. My friend was in the hospital, and his family, a 7-year-old daughter, my buddy's wife, and their dog, were dead. Fire was electrical. The investigation itself didn't make much sense though. I wish I had the words to describe my sorrow. My buddy was forced into early retirement. His burns were too great to allow him to do his job again. He was never the same after that, understandably so. I remember going to his family's funeral. It was a cold day. My buddy wouldn't speak, so I spoke on his behalf. He looked lost, but as I was about to leave, he handed me a piece of paper. I was going to take it, but he gripped me tightly and looked me in the eyes. The look in his eyes suggested that he was afraid and deeply saddened all at once. Once he let me go, I opened the paper, and during the funeral he had been sketching. The sketch was what he gave me, and when I saw it, I felt a sense of dread and cold wind pass by. It was a drawing of the image emblazoned at the other scenes of the warehouse fires. It was a tree with a dark hooded figure next to it. I asked my buddy what it meant, and uttered the only 3 words I ever heard him speak ever again. I saw it. Have you ever had a reoccurring dream? Maybe you visited the same place and dreamed more than once. I'm not sure how to explain this, but I'll do my best. I work for a fire department in Chicago. I'm very prideful of my work. I've always wanted to help others growing up, and I was that kid who really admired and was impressed by those who fought fires. Granted, firefighters aren't always fighting fires. In fact, the majority of our calls are usually medical emergencies, but regardless, it's helping people, and that's something I've always loved doing. Anyway, my story starts about 4 years into my job. I've had this dream of a burning building. I had this dream when I was a child. It was partly what inspired me to become a firefighter. In the dream, I'm fighting this fire. It's a massive one, and every time I fight it, there's someone in the fire. As I'm about to see who or what, I can hear a woman calling. I can hear her cries for help. Then I awake as an explosion rings out. As I said, I've had this dream several times throughout my lifetime. Strange as it sounds, I always am grateful for the dream, as partly because of it I'm here today. I awoke to a late night call in October of 2013. It wasn't anything crazy, a small apartment fire, but I indistinctly remember this feeling of foreboding. You have a feeling you couldn't shake, right? Anybody ever feel that? A feeling of impending doom that has no explanation. That is the feeling I am describing. We put the fire out quickly, and everything was fine. The tenant was a little shaken up, but their apartment would be salvaged. I went to sleep that night and had the dream again. I was in the building, the fire was raging, and I could hear a woman screaming while a figure of some kind stood in the fire. I can always remember a pull toward this figure that was usually overpowered by my want to save the life of whoever is screaming. The explosion happened, but this time, I shoot awake as it was so loud and real that I swore it was happening in my room. As it turns out, it was just another call. This time, there was a bigger fire at a utility building. As we were putting the fire out, I swear for a split second, I saw someone standing in the flames. This was followed by the sudden, overwhelming sensation of dread. We put the fire out and no one else was there. No one was even in the utility building as it was 3 in the morning. I shook this off, and shortly after my shift ended, I went home. I crashed hard and was immediately hit with the same dream again. It is important to note, at this point, the dream was something that would happen every so often for so many years that now it was happening every few nights that I didn't entirely know what to make of it. But I had a job I loved and a family at home I cherished. I was quite happy with my life. I wasn't going to let that dream ruin it. The next several nights were relatively quiet. We had some small forest fires and some medical emergencies, but everyone involved in these turned out okay. Still though, through these shifts, I felt that creeping dread growing more prominent. Every night it grew stronger. This all led up to the late October night when my fears became a reality. The dread would become quite clear, and my entire view on life would be altered forever. I remember the call quite clearly. We had a rather large apartment complex that had burst into flames very suddenly. We went out and rushed into the moment, and we arrived very quickly. I remember the massive size of the building and the immersed nature of the fire itself. Rushing in head first, we got several of the tenants on the lower floors out first. We pushed through, hammering this fire with everyone we had on hand while going in and out of the building, getting everyone we could out. I remember climbing the ladder and going up several stories until I reached a familiar sight. There was a stairwell. Everything around me was smoke-filled, but I eventually hit a clear spot. This in itself was odd enough. What was stranger was the familiarity of it all. It was my dream. I remember seeing something in the fire before hearing a woman's distant scream. I turned my attention toward the sound of the woman, and that's when the explosion happened. I remember diving to the floor and feeling flames soar around me and all above. I stood up after realizing that I wasn't dead and I was strangely okay. I heard the woman screaming, still pushing forward. As I moved, one step at a time, carefully, the fire grew stronger. I felt something in the building with me. Something followed me. I know how crazy it sounds, and you have to understand I am a very level-headed guy. I pressed forward and continued to do my job. When I arrived at the apartment, I believed the woman was screaming. I made my way inside and headed to the bathroom. Inside I found a woman, and at the window I was in, one of the other firefighters took the woman's girl, and we helped them both down. I went back up and checked for any sign of other life. I remember looking all over, and while I sensed something was up there, I never found an actual person. Having searched everywhere I could and every possible place that wasn't engulfed in flames, this situation became too dangerous. I headed back toward the ladder and headed out of the building for the final time. As I stepped out of the window, I heard a very distinct and disturbing yell come from behind me. It was like a mix of a shrill screaming and an inhuman growling. I still have no words to explain what I heard that night, but I quickly headed down the ladder and got out of there. It took us another 4 hours to get the fire in check. Eventually, we succeeded. Even better, as we realized later, there were no casualties. Everyone in the building had been safely evacuated and had survived the fire. Again, I can't begin to explain to you what I witnessed or what was happening that night during the fire. I can say, I've never had the dream I had my entire life leading to that moment ever again. It was as if, simply, something willed itself into existence. I'm not sure what happened that night, but I am convinced that the fire was not natural. I'm not sure how to put this, but I believe something otherworldly may have caused the fire. I have no idea what it could be or why it did, but I do know I'm grateful to be alive, and I'm extremely grateful everyone survived that night. I work for a small firehouse in a very small town in Illinois. We don't usually have large fires or anything crazy happening here. In fact, life is very, very slow, and all that said, the story I'm about to share is very different from everyday life here. It is something I'll never forget and something I'm sure this town will never forget. I will not share the name of my town for privacy reasons. It all started on a Sunday afternoon. There was a house fire, and upon arrival, a man was standing there, naked, standing, then bowing, sitting on his legs, face to the ground before standing and repeating this. I couldn't understand what he was saying. It seemed like gibberish, like he was doing some ritual. We moved, and the man didn't resist and continued with his chanting and praying until the police arrived. We were able to stop the fire before too much damage was incurred, the naked man turning out to be the homeowner. The police tried interrogating him, but he never gave a real answer as to why he did it. Apparently, he just continued chanting and praying. I didn't recognize the man. I'd never seen him, which was strange as it was a small town. My first thought was, maybe he had just moved here, but then why move some places to burn your house down? Knowing we'd probably never really know why he did what he did, I tried just to let it go and move on. I did this for as long as it took to get the next call. We got called out to an older woman in town. We'll call her Mary. Mary was a sweet lady and a God-fearing woman. She often baked cookies for law enforcement and even the rest of us first responders, be they EMS or firefighters. She was a prominent churchgoer and the sweetest soul our town has ever been graced to know. Anyway, we responded to the fire at around 2 in the morning, which was roughly 3 to 5 minutes after getting the call. It wasn't far, and we are a small town after all. We fought the fire for quite some time. Every time we had it under control, it would suddenly prove us wrong. Entering the home to see if Mary was around, I was shocked to find her crying in some unknown gibberish and smiling as the flesh from her skin was being burned off. It was something completely unexplainable. She did not appear to be in any pain, and I tried to pull her out of the house, but as we got her out of the house, she died in my arms. She was barely recognizable now, and soon after the fire was put out completely, the home was no longer salvageable, and everything was lost in the fire. We had no clue what was going on or why it happened. There was no explanation as to why Mary let herself burn alive. The next few weeks went by with no major fires or strange occurrences. The strange fires had started to fade to the back of everyone's mind until Monday morning when we got a call to put out a fire at a school in town. No children were harmed, thankfully. We got everyone, and everyone was able to be accounted for and they were fine. We were able to put the fire itself out before it took the school. All that said, the principal, a man who had taught me growing up in many of the townsfolk here, was found in his office where the fire started, hanging. There was no reason as to why this happened. No suicide note, nothing. The man had simply started a fire and then hung himself in his office. I think all of this was quite strange, but it was also unexplainable. We weren't sure why people were doing this. The first guy we didn't know, but everyone after were people who we knew our whole lives and were all very well respected. So why would they do these things? The next strange call came a few days later, but it was a medical call, not a fire call. A law enforcement officer had been found in his home bleeding profusely. He had a knife stuck in the floor next to him and was cauterizing the things he carved into his flesh with a lighter. He seemed unfazed by the wounds or the process by which he was healing them. The man was told to stop and was eventually forced to do so. When police arrived, everyone was shocked. The floors and walls were covered with his blood. Needless to say, the man is no longer in law enforcement. He is still in a psych ward to this day. Outside of that, he had several of the same things carved into his flesh. His motive? He claimed they watched him. Who they were, we'll probably never know. 5 days later, the final incident occurred. It was in the middle of a local grocery store where a woman stood naked. Police got there first and weren't called until she set fire onto herself. The woman was bleeding and had a knife through the right cheek. She had been sawing at her flesh and looked like she was in some sort of trance. This is something we were told upon arriving at the scene. One of the officers told me she had already doused herself in gasoline prior, and when the officers approached herself, she lit herself on fire. This caused a chain reaction that spread unusually quickly. By the time it was all over, the store was entirely lost. There was something off with the fire though. It wasn't right. The blaze was too strong, and it shouldn't have gone up as quickly as it did. A day later, the first man from this strange series of occurrences disappeared from his cell. No one is sure how, but after he was gone, there were no more occurrences like this within the town. Things went back to being relatively normal, and nothing unusual has happened since then. Did this man somehow create these strange occurrences? Was there something else going on entirely? I have way too many questions about all of it, and I imagine I'll never get concrete answers to any of it. I'm a retired fire captain who used to work in Montana. Many years ago, there was an unexplainable incident that occurred near some crossroads late one night in the town I live in. It was there I witnessed something horrific. I saw a fire that burned much of the town I lived in. The fire was something unusual. It seemed like it had a mind of its own. Did it? Probably not, but there was something weird going on for sure. I responded to the scene of the fire on these crossroads. The first thing you gotta understand is, I'm not the superstitious sort at all, but this was an odd fire. It seemed to burn and spread in all four directions before forming a wide wall and spreading outward in every direction possible. If that sounds strange, I got something even stranger for you. We quickly sprang into action, fighting this fire while police and the others began helping with evacuations. The fire though seemed to grow the more we fought it. I'm not talking it found more fuels and grew. I mean, it was as though it was just growing on its own, and any deterrent we used against it just made it grow even larger. I've never seen a fire like this one before or since. We could temporarily impede the fire's progress, but it would grow taller and slowly advance. The heat was insane, even for a fire. We had everyone in our town, and a few from neighboring towns on top, trying to just create a containment line and fight the fire back, and yet it still progressed, even with all that help. Inside the fire, you could hear a strange calling. It was like a choir, and it was quite audible. This wasn't something that only I heard, it was something that multiple people could hear. It wasn't long after we began to hear this that we got calls that a house in town was beginning to burn. We sent some of the neighboring units out, and it was later reported that the house had just shot up in flames out of nowhere. That fire began to spread so quickly that it began to work its way back toward the other fire until it all just joined together. At first, we were looking at all the massive walls of fire, and the more it grew, the louder that choir would grow. I'd like to say it was some auditory hallucination caused by the heat itself, but it was just so clear that I can't rightfully claim that. At this point, we'd evacuated the town completely, so we knew at least no one would be in danger. We chased the fire down into town and tried our best to contain it. Nothing we were doing was helping though, and before we knew it, half the town was already up in flames. This is where things take a deeply strange turn. The fire itself slowly crept its way forward, until it was at the local church. It was here it seemed to shoot toward the building, which immediately burst into flames before finally quickly burning to the ground. After this, it began to rain. As it rained, the flames began to slowly fade until they were gone. When we finally assessed the damage in the town, the only damage was smoke related in most places. Literally, all buildings, even the ones engulfed by this fire, were standing and seemed to be okay. The church was the only building that burned to the ground. How do you rightfully explain that insanity? I have never seen anything like this in my life or career before or since. Even talking about it now, I realize how completely crazy I sound. But it wouldn't have been. If you would have been there, well, you would understand. The only thing stranger than the fire was the choir within it. Why would a fire sing so audibly? Was there something inside the fire? Could there have been anything controlling this monstrosity? I'm not sure. It still doesn't make any sense to me at all. I'm sorry if this story is short, but I thought I'd explain what little I could understand of it all. I'm not much of a churchgoer myself, but I have to question why is it the church was the only thing that burned. Anyway, that's my story. Make of it what you will. Has anyone else out there experienced a fire like this? I'd love to hear your thoughts. My story isn't strange. No, it's a testament to how crazy fires can be. It's a testament to how careful people need to be. For privacy reasons, I'm not stating my name or town. That out of the way, let me tell you how I watched my small town burn to the ground completely. It started rather simply. You see, someone was mowing their lawn on a particularly hot summer day. Then they had been told not to do so due to the heat and the dryness of the land. The fire sparked and quickly took the man and his property out of existence. A lot of people underestimate how easy it is to start a fire and how quickly it can spread. We got the call a short while after. By the time we arrived, this fire had spread quickly across this man's land. The land was several hundred acres, and when we arrived, over half of it was already in flames. It was heading toward the town itself at a quick rate. We, of course, hopped into go mode in terms of evacuations and such, and by the time we got everybody out of town, the fire was already inside the town itself and had engulfed a gas station. You can imagine what happened next. There was an explosion that caused the fire to expand extremely quickly. We spent the next several hours fighting this thing and getting some level of containment on it. It was around that time we noticed the wind shifting and becoming much stronger. This caused us to have the pushback of the fire begun growing again. Sadly, in the area I lived back then, there was a lot of land and a lot of wind. If a fire broke out, it was quite easy for it to get out of hand real quick. By the time night had fallen, we were still battling this thing and it made its way through town, burning everything in sight. We continued this fight, and by the next morning, we had help from other services in the surrounding area. We fought long and hard to contain this thing, but when night fell once more, it was quite clear we had lost the town. Over the next few days, we continued fighting back against the blaze, and before long it was in danger of burning another town. On the dawn of the 7th day, the wind had died down, and we had some rain coming through. This helped to slow the fire down by quite a bit and was pretty much a miracle from God, seeing as the rain wasn't forecast at all during that time, and summer was always known for heat. The next day we got containment and more rain. The rain lasted another 3 days after that, and when all was said and done, thousands of acres of land had burned to the ground, including homes. There were no fatalities, so we were able to evacuate those in the path of this fire, and I thank God every day for the rain. That said, I also curse him for letting us lose the town. Everyone who lived in the town was displaced. If you could have seen the devastation the fire wrought, you'd be shocked. This goes tenfold since we were a small town. As the years went on, we were able to rebuild and the town is alive and thriving once again. We will never forget the fire or the destruction it wrought upon us. It is still shocking to me how one day your town can be there, the next it can suddenly not exist. All that said, it is a testament to our strength as humans that we were able to rebuild and are stronger than ever today. You can learn a lot from the successful things that happen in your life, but you'll never learn more than in the most trying times of your life. That's where you learn who you and your fellow man and woman truly are. That's when you are forced to realize how hopeless you are and helpless you are, and ultimately. I still have nightmares about the fire, and I still feel a great deal of guilt for not having saved my town the first time. I've gone to therapy since, and life is much better today, but I'm not sure I'll ever truly stop blaming myself. We did all we could, and those who live here always tell us this, but inside, I always think, was there a way to save this place the first time? So please, Always be wary of what you are doing, especially if you live in drier areas. Always be careful, and in the case of an evacuation, always be prepared to leave in an instant. Thank you for listening to my story.
Back in 2015, I graduated from the police academy and started working as a police officer for my town. The area where I'm located is actually considered frontier. Big sky is pretty fast. Open and towns are miles apart with little in between them. My specific town, we do both in-city limits and out-of-city limits 911 responses. Meaning, if there are no sheriff deputies nearby where the call is happening, then we usually go and handle the call till the deputy arrives. This happened only if it's close to our town. Our county is 60 by 50 miles with 2 towns and a few communities dotted here and there. About a month after my FTO phase, I was put on patrol on my own without any training officer. One night, a few hours into my shift, I was dispatched to a remote area outside of our city limits, roughly about 33 miles into the middle of nowhere in a community. Apparently, a female had called 911 and our neighbor county's 911 center had received it and transferred it to our dispatch. A female caller was apparently distraught, scared, and didn't know where she was. She advised her dispatch that it is dark and her car will not start. She was getting cold, and she also stated that she's not from the area. So me being the rookie, I was assigned that service request. Since it was deemed as a rescue welfare check, I had another officer join me. We responded, and it was like a 40-minute response on a mountain back road to locate a silver 2003 Toyota Highlander. Meanwhile, dispatch was able to ping the number she was calling on and was able to get a location. As it turns out, it wasn't in the community where we were being dispatched to. She was actually 13 miles west of the community in a heavily wooded area somewhere on a logging road. The cell tower in town relayed her call, which registered it as coming from that community. Nothing seemed out of place when dispatch advised us on her location. We figured it was some hiker or outdoors person since it was in that general location. By the time we arrived in the area, it was already around 12 p.m. We started on the dirt road into the back country and where dispatch gave us the possible coordinates of the call origin. Dispatch advised us that she's still on the line with the RP. We let her know that there's no vehicle at that location. We also let her know that we're going to turn on our sirens. It being in the middle of the mountains, when we turned on the siren, it had echoed throughout the valley and echoed off the mountains. RP advised dispatch that she can hear the police sirens, but they sounded far away still. We think, okay, she must be further back somewhere. About 2 miles up was a split in the road. My partner went left and I went right. I was thinking, here we go with that Scooby-Doo crud. Nothing seemed out of place, nor were there any feelings of danger that I could remember feeling. About 4 miles in on my side, I radioed my partner. "You find anything yet?" He advised me. "I didn't come across anything so far." He let our dispatch know that he's going to turn on his siren again. When he did, the RP advised our dispatch that it sounded somewhat close, but it was still far away. So I radioed our dispatch that I was going to turn mine on. When I did, the RP stated that the other siren was really close at the time. I was thinking, oh good, she must be up the road somewhere. I continue up the road about a mile when dispatch advised me that the RP stated that she can see headlights through the trees and hear you coming up the road. Dispatch also advised me that the RP ended the call with them, stating that she's going to meet you next to her vehicle. When I came around a bend, my patrol vehicle's lights fully illuminated the road in front of me. Off to the side of the road was a silver 2000s Highlander. That's when stuff got really strange. Keep in mind that it was summertime. In front of me was a silver Highlander, but there were millions upon millions of flies swarming outside of it. I turn on my spotlight and face it on the black window. That's when I was able to see that the inside was pitch black out, but not from window tint. It turns out it was black from flies on the inside of the vehicle as well. I was thinking, what the heck? I exit my vehicle and attempt to make my way to the Toyota. But halfway to the Highlander, the stench of decomposition was too strong. I wound up gagging and almost losing my cookies. I retreat back to my patrol vehicle and I radio my dispatch. 721. Dispatch 721, be advised I located the vehicle. Also send a deputy to my location and a supervisor. Negative on any contact with 101, possibly 1058, inside the vehicle. As a side note, a 1058 is a dead person. Dispatch. Did you advise possible 58, 721? 721. Yeah, 10-4, ma'am. Dispatch. I copy. County was advised, and 2211 and 2216 are en route to your location. Also, 700 and 704 are also en route to your location. 726, what's your 1020? 726, which is my partner, replies with, I'm just pulling up to 21's location. Be outside of my car with 21. Dispatch. I copy. Out with 721 and 0110. My partner showed up. When he got out of his vehicle, he was speechless. He asked me if I found the female yet. I told him, I'm pretty sure she's inside the vehicle, dude. His response was, I was afraid you were going to say something like that. We finally got our composure together and made our way to the vehicle. Keep in mind, we managed to find some Vicks Vapor Rub and used an EMS trick that supposedly combated the stench. It didn't help, by the way. We got close to the front driver's side door and the flies on the outside were thick. After swatting some away, we managed to find the door handle. Luckily, it was unlocked. We opened the door, and that's when we messed up and realized the most disgusting smell and sight I have ever seen. As the door swung open, a huge mass of fluids, maggots, and remains of what was left of human skin, hair, and Lord knows whatever else was in that slime spilled onto the ground. The horde of flies that came swarming out from inside the vehicle made it too much. We retreated again, gagging and puking. The smell was awful. It was so strong that there was a point to where you were able to taste it. It was like tangible. We were able to confirm that she was a 1058. I managed to find some Lysol spray in the back of my unit. My partner smoked cigarettes, so combining Lysol spray and a lighter, we made a makeshift flamethrower. We flamed as much of the millions of flies as we could, which worked pretty well at killing them and dispersing them. Once we got as much of the flies away as possible, we got a better look inside of the vehicle, and were able to see the license plate on the back of the vehicle and the inside. The inside of the vehicle had clothes and what looked like hiking supplies. There was only one woman inside when we managed to find some identification for her. She was sitting in the front driver's side, and whatever was left of her was a horrendous decomposed body covered with maggots and whatever else made her a home. On the dashboard inside the vehicle was a cell phone. I grabbed it and it was dead. Still having possession of the phone, I walked back to my patrol vehicle and had the phone charger that was compatible with hers. It was an Android Galaxy, which I also had at the time. Sometime later it turned on. My partner was looking at me with a confused look. I advised her dispatch that she should redial the number that she had called us on. She did. The female's phone began to ring. My partner freaked out. To hell with that. She's dead, but she still managed to call us? I'm shocked and weirded out. I let our dispatch know that it's ringing and the caller ID is our dispatch number. I'm shocked and confused the entire time. Supervisors and deputies show up about 20 minutes later. Deputies are coroners, so they pronounced her dead. She was sent to the crime lab. No foul play was suspected, ruling it was a natural cause. We were questioned by the higher-ups and were advised to keep quiet on the matter. FYI, they estimated that she had been in that vehicle from anywhere from a month to a month and a half. Since that incident, I no longer work as an LEO. I since switched over to our EMS, and now work as a CC paramedic, although I'm part of our SWAT team as an LEO medic. I'm a police officer from Troy, Alabama. I had been working third shift, which is 10:30 p.m. to 6:30 a.m., for a few years and was on patrol one night. It was around 3 a.m., and it was a slow night, so I was checking buildings and cruising areas where people tend to be when they shouldn't. One of the areas where we would always have problems with people digging up windows, drugs, or vandalism was a fairly old graveyard. This graveyard has many Civil War soldiers buried here and is very large. As I pulled down the road to check the graveyard, I want to note this is a one-way in and one-way out entrance. There are lots of old trees surrounding the graveyard, so it's a perfect, secluded area, hence the fairly common window fogging occurrence. I pulled into the graveyard and noticed there were no cars parked, so I started to make a right turn and turn around when I saw movement in the corner of my eye. I hit the brakes and, out of my driver's side window, about maybe 100 yards away, I saw what looked to be a black silhouette that was human-like. It was slowly but surely walking toward the tree line. I grabbed my alley light attached to my patrol car and got the beam on the figure before it walked behind a large pecan tree. I observed it walk approximately 6 or 7 steps. There were no facial features and the figure was just a black haziness. It actually turned slightly towards me as it kept walking. Now, I also want to note this was in the spring and dew would always be on the ground during this time. I proceeded to get out of my patrol car, and the figure never appeared from behind the tree, even though with the path it had been on, it should have. So, I got back in and drove down to the area where I observed the figure. Once I got close to the tree, maybe around 20 yards or so, I stopped and got out. Now, this area was totally grass, and there was a heavy layer of dew that night on the ground. There were no footsteps anywhere. The only tracks were my own from me walking around the tree trying to get my brain around it. I just couldn't figure out what it is that I saw. I radioed my buddy to come to the cemetery and I would explain more once he got here. I told him the story and he was walking around also, and we found nothing. This was not surprising, since me and him had both seen some pretty gnarly stuff on the night shift for years, and we had both seen weird lights and noises and all sorts of things, both outside and in buildings, but this was my first time seeing some sort of figure. Also, this was the longest observation I'd ever had of something that I would call supernatural. If any of you have any idea what it is I saw that night, I would love to know. Please comment them down below. And thank you, Swamp, for sharing my story. I work as a police officer in a small town. I will keep this information private as much as possible for safety reasons, as I still am an active officer in this area. One night, while I was working the night shift, I was dispatched to the VA clinic. As it turned out, a juvenile was in a psychiatrist appointment for hearing voices. The kid reportedly heard a pair of hatchets tell him, "Cut people." So, of course, the mom brought him to the doctor being worried about her son. During the appointment, the mother grabbed the hatchets from the bag to show the shrink. As soon as she pulled them into view, the kid grabbed them and ran out of the building and directly into the cemetery across the street. Thankfully, I was not asked to run alongside the K-9 units to track this kid, but they found him with no major incident. I was tasked with bringing the kid to the centers for evaluation, and while he was in the back of my patrol car, we distracted him with questions while another officer placed the hatchets in my trunk. While on my way to the centers, the kid said, "Sir, you have my hatchets in the trunk, don't you? I can feel them." I didn't verbally respond, but I simply laughed a little. I was never so freaked out by anything to this day. The centers obviously wouldn't take the hatchets. My sergeant told me not to place them in evidence, so I tried to return them to the mother, and she also refused to take them. So I ended up just throwing them out. This was truly one of the oddest experiences of my entire life. I know this isn't the scariest or freakiest or even the strangest experience you've ever told, but I am grateful that you decided to share it anyway. I'm a police officer in a county on the East Coast. This incident happened about a year ago on October 31st. This was around the time of the height of the clown fad. Usually I work in a street crime unit, but due to the heavy complaint load we get on Halloween, the department offered various extra duty jobs. Basically, you would be a regular patrolman for the day, and I really couldn't pass up 10 hours of overtime. Anyway, as soon as I got on the road, I got dispatched to a suicidal teen. On the call, the caller clearly stated that she wasn't suicidal, but was feeling depressed and wanted to go to a local psychiatric clinic to talk to counselors there. I made my way over, and as I was entering the neighborhood, I saw a clown. Not just any clown, but it looked like to be Pennywise the clown. He was standing on a field holding balloons in one hand and a very large butcher knife in the other. Now, I couldn't really preempt from the call I was dispatched to. It would be my luck that the caller would actually hang herself while I got in a shootout with this clown. So I hurried down the 2 extra blocks to make sure the caller didn't hurt herself. I contacted her and quickly put her in my car and told her, if there is a clown standing on that field, I'm going to jump out and address it. Will you be okay for a few minutes if that happens? The girl was actually pretty excited that she may get a good show on Halloween, and agreed to behave inside the back of my car if that did happen. However, by the time I was back at the same spot, the clown was gone. I dropped the girl at the clinic and wished her well. As soon as I dropped her off, a buddy of mine got dispatched to the same neighborhood I was just at in reference to a clown wielding a knife. I made my way over there and got out before my buddy did. I was alone, and by this time the sun was setting and the light was becoming scarce. I drew my gun and began to search for this clown on my own. I didn't know if this was some guy being an idiot or something more perverse, so I took it very seriously. After searching for about 10 minutes, I found the knife that he had along with a note that said, "Too slow," like he was mocking me. Nothing else came of it though. I checked the call logs for the next couple of weeks to make sure that we didn't have any kids missing or someone getting hurt by some freak in a clown outfit. However, luckily, I didn't seem to find anything. It still bothers me though that I wasn't able to find out if that guy was just a dummy wearing makeup or some lunatic trying to hurt someone. I was a 911 dispatcher and communications officer for a rural sheriff's department. Normally, what happens when we get a call on 911 is our ANI and ALI would populate with a number and address, though sometimes these weren't accurate or correct, especially if the caller used a cell phone, so we would always verify the address with the reporting party before sending any units out. Still, we could tell based off the first 3 numbers if it was a landline, which usually had the correct address. One night, I was working a graveyard shift and I was by myself. I got a 911 call and oddly, it didn't populate a phone number at all, but it did populate an address into our CAD, computer-aided dispatch system. When I answered, 911, what is the address of your emergency? All I heard in response at first was a strange, garbled, crackling and hissing sound, and what I can only describe as guttural noises that didn't quite sound electronic, but also didn't quite sound human either. It wasn't like the typical sounds you would hear from a bad connection. If I had to describe it, it almost sounded organic. I asked again, 911, what is your emergency? And after another moment of crackling and hissing, I heard a faraway voice that sounded like a child saying, "Hi." The child sounded very young, like maybe only 3 or 4 years old if I had to guess. I switched into a more comforting tone to try to find out what was wrong. After all, calls dealing with children can be very difficult to get correct information and location due to their age and the potential trauma they have witnessed. I tried to ask the child what was wrong, where they were at, and if they knew what their phone number was, a name, anything. Most questions the kid replied with just childish noises, like they were thinking and trailed off or didn't respond at all. I was getting ready to send out some units for a check at the address while still trying to get information from the child. And while I was reading out to some officers, I heard the little voice on the line say to me, "Don't send someone. I want to come see you." This is where it started to get eerie. I didn't tell the child yet that I was sending police officers, as I had only just dispatched out a unit not even like 2 seconds before that. I told the kid to stay on the line with me until the officer got to them, especially important since there was no callback number, no call history from that address, and I had no idea what was going on because the child wouldn't tell me more or even respond to my questions. I started giving the child some direction, telling them an officer would be there soon and he would help the kid. The child said, "I want to see you," and the line went dead. Normally, we would call back. I tried to do the automatic callback, but as it had picked up no number, this didn't seem to work. My officer got to the scene a few minutes later and radioed me to verify the address in the street, so I gave it again. He calls me on his cell phone and tells me that this particular street was a private road that only had 2 homes, one that belonged to a rancher and one that belonged to a retired couple in their 70s. Neither had any children located within their homes, or knew anyone local who had children. The address that populated on the ANI/ALI didn't even exist. Because it was a child, my officer and a few more did some patrol in the area and some surrounding areas, but they never did find anything of note. It was one of the strangest calls I've ever taken, and I still think about it from time to time. I'm a strong believer in the paranormal, but having worked in law enforcement, I always approach it with a skeptical eye, as you should. There was just something unnatural about that whole call. The sounds I've never heard before on the line, and never heard in any situation since. If it was really paranormal or not, I can't say. It was just really weird and freaked me out so much. And thank you, Swamp Dweller, for sharing this experience for everyone to hear. So this happened approximately a week ago. I was gonna share it then, but I thought it would be better just to let this digest a bit and not post on a knee-jerk reaction. I am a police officer in a city of about 30,000 people. I am currently assigned to our midnight shift, working the hours of 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. At the beginning of my shift, I am called to a house in what can be described as the wealthiest part of town. I am told by my dispatch that the resident of the house, a teenage girl, believes that an adult male is attempting to enter her home. I activated my lights and sirens and arrived at the home a short time later. I knocked on the door and made contact with the caller, a frantic 18-year-old girl. My sergeant arrives on the scene a short time later. I asked her to describe what happened. She explains that while laying on the couch she heard some pounding on the front door. She then looked out the peep and did not see anyone. She then heard banging on the back sliding glass door and screaming from outside. Again, she went and checked and did not see anyone. We asked if anyone made entry into the home. The complainant denies this. My sergeant and I checked the area, finding no footprints in the yard. We also checked the dew in the grass, finding it to be undisturbed. We also checked the glass for fingerprints and were unable to locate any. We chalked it up to this girl's friends playing a prank on her, and something like that, or her having some sort of active imagination. Approximately 3 hours later, we are called back to the residence. We are notified that the female believes someone to be inside the home this time. I beat my partner to the house by approximately 3 or 4 minutes. I enter and begin speaking with this complainant, who is visibly shaken. I am told that she was awoken by more banging and a man saying, "I know you're in there." The complainant states that she had barricaded the basement door with a chair, as she believes someone could easily enter the home through the attached garage. I told her to stay put in the living room, and I went to go search the basement and garage. I draw my firearm in search of the basement. During my search, I feel very uneasy and as if I'm being watched. I complete my search as my partner arrives. I walk back upstairs to meet with her and tell her that I haven't cleared the rest of the home yet. She draws her weapon and helps me search for the rest of the home. The last room we enter belongs to the complainant, and it is her bedroom. Inside the bedroom we find a Ouija board. It's in plain view. We deem the residence safe and go back to the living room. At this point, the complainant is frantically shaking and crying. We ask if she lives alone. She states that she stays with her grandparents. She also states that they are out of town on business. She says that she is frequently home alone due to her grandparents being on out-of-town business. I ask to call and speak with her grandpa. I speak with him and learn that the complainant does not have any mental health issues nor any behavior issues. The complainant also does not use any form of drug that he knows of besides nicotine. Grandpa states that he is going to call another family member to come look after the complainant. We speak with the complainant again, learning that she does not currently suffer from any mental health issues. The complainant admits to smoking weed occasionally, but not partaking on any of the night of the disturbance. The complainant also advised us that she found the Ouija board the day hidden in the closet of the home. Her condition further degraded and she requested that we take her somewhere else. My partner, being a female officer, transported the complainant back to the HQ, where she was picked up by a family member at a later time. I stayed at the home and searched the surrounding area again. I again did not locate any signs of a person being outside the home. I don't know if this was the right place to post this or share this, but I hope it has a place on your show. I for sure did not feel good whilst being in that basement, that's for sure. I used to be a huge skeptic on the paranormal until I took this job. However, I have experienced and dealt with multiple things that I could not explain in regard to calls to my service. My partner also stated to feel very uneasy while being in the house. Does anyone think she may have stumbled across something, or did we just feed into the paranoias of a young girl who was home alone? Unfortunately, I have not been called out to that home ever since, so I have not got to investigate into this occurrence any further. Thank you for listening to my experience, and thank you for sharing it on your show. This story is a bit different from 911 and dispatch calls, but I was in medic school finishing up some ride-alongs in a big city in Oklahoma. So we get this call at around midnight to a county address outside the city. It was a pretty vague dispatch, but possibly a fight of some sort. We started heading out there, and we find out as we are going along that this is way, way outside of town. It was one of those calls that by the time we realized it was outside of our coverage area, it just wasn't worth turning around and letting someone else deal with it, so we kept going. We're driving and eventually are up in the hills on dirt roads, pretty much driving around with no real way of figuring out where our patient is. We haven't seen any houses or cars or people when we come around a corner, and there's some ancient looking dude in the middle of the road. He doesn't flinch, even though we almost hit him, and just points further down the road without saying anything when we ask him if he called or what's going on. Definitely weird, but whatever, we pushed through. So we continued down the road, and eventually we drive onto this meadow surrounded by trees, and in the headlights we can see this lady in the middle of the meadow just standing there. The meadow isn't huge, but our scene lights really didn't light up the edges. So we pull up and start doing our thing. She's a little bloody, but it doesn't seem to be that bad. It seems to be more psychological than anything. And she's not really doing much helping us figure out what's going on. After about 5 minutes, a county deputy pulls into the meadow and gets out and comes over to us. He seems really nervous and keeps looking around, which seemed really weird and puts us all on a little bit more on edge, you know? Another minute or two passes and we all notice that it's gotten really, really quiet. Eerily quiet. Now this is Oklahoma in the middle of the woods in summer. The bugs have been making a huge racket. Now, all of a sudden, it's just silence. All the hair stands up on your neck, and one of the guys I was working with pulls out a gigantic spotlight from the truck and scans the tree line. Blood runs completely cold. There were about 20 guys with rifles standing around the edge of the meadow, just watching us from the darkness. They weren't pointing them at us, but talk about some sphincter tone going from 0 to 100 in no time flat. We are kind of just frozen, but After what felt like 10 minutes, the deputy breaks the silence by simply saying, "Yeah, we should go." So we did. We climbed into the ambulance, dragged the patient with us, and booked it out of there. People from urban areas or even small towns don't realize it, but there are definitely hill people, as I will call them, still out there who live completely separate from society. Thanks for listening to these creepy and allegedly true 911 and first responder stories. If you enjoyed these stories, please hit that like button, as it helps me out a ton. The more likes this video gets, the more YouTube promotes it to fresh new eyes. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us? Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a new video. I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. Man, I'll tell you what, these stories just had me freaked out. Some of them are just so unexplainable. It only makes me think, what do first responders see on a daily basis? Probably a lot more creepy stuff than we do, huh? If you have a story you would like to share, whether it be a 911, a first responder story, or something different, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this show going. If you're not aware, you can download and listen to your favorite scary stories from the swamp on Spotify, iTunes, and pretty much every other major podcast platform out there. You can find links to do that in the description down below. As always, thank you guys so much for supporting the swamp. I would never have imagined us amassing over 140,000 of you. If you made it to the end, be sure to comment 3750 to let me know you made it to the very end and to confuse anybody in the comments who didn't make it to the end. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.